I didn't realize my marriage was already over when my husband said it. We were sitting in our kitchen late evening, the kind of quiet that comes after long workdays and shared routines. The dishwasher hummed. My phone lay face down on the table. I was halfway through dinner when he leaned back in his chair and smiled. Slow, knowing, almost amused. "You'll never be CEO," he said. Not angry, not loud. Casual, like he was stating the weather. I laughed once, out of reflex. "What?" He didn't repeat it. He took a sip of his drink and looked at me with something between pity and impatience. "You're good at what you do," he continued. "But that's it. You're a worker. You like stability. You don't have the instincts for the top. You should probably just accept that. And be grateful I'm not bored yet." The fork slipped from my fingers and clinked against the plate. I was 34. We'd been married 5 years. I was a senior project manager at a tech consulting firm. Steady career, decent money, respected by clients and teams. I wasn't chasing titles, but I wasn't stagnant either. I thought we were building something together. He didn't see it that way. "This isn't an insult," he added, almost kindly. "It's realism." I told myself he was stressed, that work had been hard, that marriage meant absorbing rough edges without letting them cut too deep. So I swallowed it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't frustration speaking. It was preparation. Because while I was still defending him in my head, he was already investing elsewhere, not emotionally, strategically. A few months later, the late nights started. Stories that didn't quite line up. Dinners that ran too long. Calls taken in the other room. When I finally checked the phone records, my hands shook so badly I had to sit down. Hundreds of messages. All to one number. My boss. A woman with authority over my career. A woman who'd recently started smiling too warmly at company events. A woman who had begun questioning my work, my judgment, my leadership potential. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. "She's going places," he said. "You're not." That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a coordinated erasure of my marriage, my career, my credibility. What none of them understood was this. I don't fight loudly. I wait, and when I return, it's not for revenge. It's for control. Before everything collapsed, my life looked deceptively normal. I met my husband when I was 28 at a friend's low-key birthday dinner where half the people worked in tech and the other half pretended they didn't care about titles while quietly memorizing them. He was charming, in an effortless way, confident without being loud, observant, good at asking questions that made you feel interesting. When he focused on you, it felt like intention. We started dating slowly, real dates, long conversations, shared jokes that didn't need explaining. He admired my discipline, or at least that's what he said. I liked that he had ambition without the frantic edge I'd seen in other men. When he talked about the future, it sounded structured, planned, safe. 2 years later, we were married. Not a flashy wedding. No over-the-top speeches about destiny. Just a quiet certainty that we were aligned. Or so I thought. By then, I was already deep into my career. Consulting isn't glamorous, but it's relentless. You learn how systems break, how people fail quietly, how decisions ripple long after meetings end. I was good at it, not the loudest voice in the room, but the one people trusted when things went sideways. My husband worked in sales. He liked momentum, visibility, wins that came with applause. We joked about how different our worlds were, me with spreadsheets and process maps, him with dinners and handshakes and polished decks. It felt complementary. In the early years of marriage, we functioned well. We split responsibilities. We hosted friends. We talked about kids in vague someday terms. He teased me for being cautious. I teased him for chasing validation. The first shift was subtle. It happened after a company event, one where my boss, newly promoted, gave a speech that drew a little too much admiration. My husband watched her the way people watch power when they're deciding if it's useful. "She's impressive," he said later, swirling ice in his glass. "Knows how to command a room." I agreed, without thinking much of it. After that, he started asking more questions about my work, about her, about the company, about who had influence and who didn't. It didn't feel threatening, just curious. At work, my environment began to change too. My boss became more visible in my projects, more involved. She started pushing back on decisions she used to trust me with, asking for revisions that didn't quite make sense, suggesting I wasn't thinking big enough. At home, my husband became sharper. Not cruel, just dismissive in small ways. When I talked about long-term goals, he'd tilt his head like I was describing something quaint. When I mentioned leadership tracks, he'd smile thinly and say things like, You like where you are, though. You're not the type to fight for the top. I told myself it was harmless. Marriage teaches you to normalize things, to sand down moments that don't fit the picture you've invested years building. You tell yourself every couple goes through phases, that love isn't supposed to feel exciting forever. I didn't see the alignment happening in the background. How my boss's perception of me was shifting at the same time my husband's respect was quietly evaporating. How narratives were being written without my input. By the time the kitchen conversation happened, the one where he smiled and told me I'd never be CEO, the ground had already been hollowed out beneath my feet. I just didn't know it yet. The warning signs didn't arrive as explosions. They slipped in quietly, disguised as stress, timing, misunderstandings. After that kitchen conversation, something shifted inside me. Not panic, not anger, but awareness. Once you notice the imbalance, you can't unsee it. I started paying closer attention, not obsessively, just accurately. My husband's phone never left his hand anymore. He used to toss it onto the counter when he got home, screen down, forgotten. Now it lived in his pocket. If it buzzed, he checked it immediately. If I walked into the room while he was typing, he'd angle the screen away without thinking. At first, I told myself it was work. Sales thrives on urgency. Clients demand responsiveness. That was reasonable. What wasn't reasonable was how often those work calls happened late at night, and how defensive he became if I asked even a neutral question. "Do you mind taking that later?" I asked once, already in bed. He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand how my job works." I let it go. At work, the pressure intensified. My boss started documenting things she'd never cared about before. Small delays. Decisions she'd previously approved were now framed as misjudgments. In meetings, she'd interrupt me mid-sentence, then repeat my point as if it were her own, slightly reframed, more authoritative. The room always nodded. After one meeting, a colleague pulled me aside. "Is everything okay?" he asked carefully. "She seems hard on you lately." I smiled and said it was fine. At home, my husband's support started sounding like correction. "You're great at execution," he said one night, scrolling on his phone, "but leadership is political. You don't really play that game." There was no cruelty in his voice, just certainty. I noticed how often he mentioned my boss now. Her strategy, her confidence, the way she commanded respect. He spoke about her with admiration he no longer reserved for me. Still, I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't have enough information yet. The first real crack came on a Thursday night. He came home late, later than usual. Said there had been client drinks that turned into dinner. His story was detailed, almost rehearsed. When he showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't touch it. But I remembered the number. The next day during lunch, I logged into our shared phone account. I told myself it was practical. Checking charges, managing bills. The lie barely registered. The screen loaded. Hundreds of messages. All to one number. My boss's. Not scattered, not occasional. A steady, intimate rhythm. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. The kind of frequency that only exists when 2 people are actively sharing a world. I sat there, staring at the screen, my breath shallow, my hands numb. Suddenly, everything aligned. The scrutiny at work, the dismissiveness at home, the confidence with which he'd told me I'd never be CEO. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. That night when he came home, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked one question. "Are you sleeping with her?" He paused, just a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. No apology, no explanation. "She understands ambition," he said. "She sees potential. This isn't personal." That was when I knew. I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was being positioned as collateral. The confrontation didn't explode the way people imagine betrayal does. There was no screaming, no slammed doors, no dramatic walkout. Just a quiet clarity that settled over the room like dust. I asked him to sit down. He hesitated, long enough to confirm what I already knew, then dropped into the chair across from me, arms crossed, posture guarded. He looked like someone bracing for an inconvenience, not a reckoning. "How long?" I asked. He tilted his head, considering whether honesty was worth the effort. "A few months." Months of shared dinners, shared beds, shared plans, all while he was building a second life inside my own. "And her?" I continued. "How long has she been involved in my work?" That made him frown. "You're making it sound sinister." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You're sleeping with my boss," I said. "A woman who controls my projects, my evaluations, my future. There's nothing neutral about that." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if we were negotiating something private and reasonable. "She didn't plan this," he said. Neither did I. It just happened. I stared at him. That phrase, "it just happened," has done more damage to women's lives than most deliberate cruelty ever could. So the demotions? I asked. The sudden documentation? The way she's been undermining me in meetings? He shrugged. Maybe she's just realized you're not leadership material. The words landed harder than the affair itself. Because in that moment, I understood something fundamental. He didn't just betray me. He believed he was right. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, but my voice controlled. "You coordinated this," I said, "whether you admit it or not." He scoffed. "You're overreacting." The next week confirmed everything. At work, I was pulled into a performance review I hadn't been scheduled for. HR sat quietly while my boss listed vague concerns: communication gaps, resistance to feedback, lack of executive presence. None of it matched my actual metrics. When I defended myself, calmly with data, my boss smiled thinly. "This isn't about numbers," she said. "It's about trust." Trust. The irony almost made me dizzy. 2 days later, I was reassigned off a major account I'd built from the ground up. The reason given was organizational alignment. At home, my husband acted relieved, as if the tension had lifted now that everything was out in the open. "This might be good for you," he said one night. "Less pressure. You always say you're tired." I realized then that he had already rewritten the narrative in his head. I was no longer his wife. I was the obstacle he'd outgrown. The final blow came when I received a formal notice. The company was evaluating structural changes that could affect my role. I came home, placed the envelope on the table between us, and waited. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. "She warned me this might happen," he admitted. "But honestly, maybe it's time you consider something else. A reset." A reset. I filed for divorce the next morning. Within days, he countered with accusations. Emotional instability, controlling behavior, financial pressure. None of it true. All of it effective. The restraining order came fast, based on nothing but fear theatrics and whispered implications. I was ordered out of my own home. I packed a suitcase while he watched, expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do this," he said. I looked at him for a long time. "You did this months ago," I replied. "I'm just catching up." As I walked out the door, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not rage, not grief, resolve. They thought this was the end of me. They were wrong. The first night alone felt unreal. I slept on a borrowed mattress in a cheap apartment that smelled faintly of fresh paint and someone else's past. The silence was thinner there, more exposed. No familiar creaks, no shared routines, just my breath, too loud in the dark. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't devastated, but because shock has a way of freezing emotion before it lets anything through. The divorce process moved faster than it should have. His lawyer, aggressive, polished, expensive, framed me as volatile, difficult, unpredictable, a woman who struggled with authority and resented her husband's ambition. The irony was almost impressive. In court, my boss's influence was invisible but unmistakable. Subtle credibility erosion, strategic pauses, the way doubt was allowed to linger just long enough to stick. The judge granted him primary residence of the house. Our house. I was ordered to buy out half the equity. $85,000. Money I didn't have. He kept the newer car. I paid a portion of his legal fees. I walked away with my clothes, my laptop, and $15,000 in debt that hadn't existed months earlier. People like to believe the legal system is neutral. It isn't. It's responsive to narratives, to power, to who appears more stable on paper. At work, things deteriorated quickly. My boss stopped pretending. Every project I touched suddenly had issues. Deadlines were questioned retroactively. Decisions I'd made months earlier were reframed as risks. I was excluded from meetings I'd once led. They were building a file. One afternoon, she called me into her office and closed the door. "This isn't personal," she said, hands folded neatly on the desk, "but your situation at home has raised concerns." "My situation?" I asked. "Distractions," she clarified. "Leadership requires focus." I held her gaze. "So does integrity." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I knew then that staying would end one way. Termination. Public, documented, irreversible. So I left quietly. I updated my resume at night, after work, after unpacking boxes that never quite felt like mine. I applied selectively, discreetly. I didn't badmouth anyone. I didn't explain the divorce. I let my work speak. A smaller firm took a chance on me. Same role, same pay, no title bump, no apology. I accepted without hesitation. My last day at the old company came and went without ceremony. No goodbye email, no farewell lunch. I packed my desk while my former colleagues avoided eye contact. My boss didn't come by. My husband texted that night. Shame it didn't work out. You really weren't cut out for leadership there. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. The first year after the divorce was brutal. I lived cheaply. Instant noodles, secondhand furniture, long hours, longer nights. I paid down debt dollar by dollar. Trust didn't come easily. To men, to compliments, to promises that sounded too smooth. I tried dating once. I lasted 3 weeks before realizing I wasn't ready to explain myself to anyone. So I stopped. And I worked. The smaller firm was lean, hungry. They didn't care about politics, only outcomes. When something broke, I fixed it. When a process failed, I redesigned it. I noticed inefficiencies others stepped around. They noticed too. Within a year, I was promoted. Not because I asked, because I earned it. I didn't think about my ex-husband much during that time. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because survival demanded my full attention. And somewhere between late-night spreadsheets and early morning meetings, something solid began to rebuild inside me. Not hope, competence. And that, I would learn, is far more dangerous. The second year after the divorce was when momentum replaced survival. At the smaller firm, there was no room to hide, no layers of management to absorb mistakes. If something failed, everyone felt it immediately. That pressure didn't scare me, it sharpened me. I learned the company the way I'd learned my old marriage, quietly, thoroughly, without assumptions. I watched how information moved, or didn't, where decisions stalled, which teams compensated for broken systems without being recognized for it. I started fixing things without asking permission. Not recklessly, methodically. A reporting workflow that took 3 weeks went down to 5 days. Vendor contracts that hadn't been reviewed in years were renegotiated. Entire teams stopped duplicating work they hadn't realized overlapped. The executives noticed. By the end of year 1, I was promoted to senior project manager again. Same title I'd had before, but this time it meant something. I had authority, autonomy, trust. By year 2, I was director of operations. I didn't celebrate. I just kept going. Meanwhile, my former life was unraveling without me. I heard things secondhand at first. Industry gossip travels fast when you've been in it long enough. My former boss, the woman who'd slept with my husband and pushed me out, had been promoted to CEO shortly after I left. My ex-husband followed her upward, cushioned by proximity, positioned as a rising star. On paper, they were thriving. In reality, the company was bleeding. They lost clients I used to manage personally. Senior talent left in clusters. Projects missed targets that would have once been non-negotiable. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt unsurprised. People who climb by leverage instead of competence eventually run out of leverage. At my firm, something shifted in year 3. We began acquiring struggling companies, small at first, then larger. I was put in charge of integration teams. The work was intense. Travel, restructuring, uncomfortable conversations. I was good at it. I understood how to walk into a broken system without humiliating the people inside it, how to strip inefficiency without destroying morale, how to lead without theatrics. The CEO started pulling me into strategy meetings. At first, I thought it was incidental. It wasn't. By the end of year 3, I was promoted to VP of operations. My salary jumped. My debt disappeared. My savings returned, quietly, steadily, without drama. I moved into a better apartment. Bought furniture I actually liked. Stopped flinching when my phone buzzed unexpectedly. Year 4 came with a different kind of pressure. Our private equity partners wanted expansion. New markets, new acquisitions, bigger risks. One name kept coming up. My old company. I recognized it immediately from the financials. Declining revenue, inflated projections, talent loss disguised as strategic restructuring. It was textbook mismanagement. In the meeting, the CEO turned to me. "What do you know about this firm?" he asked. "I worked there for 8 years," I said. "I know the systems, the people, the weaknesses, and why they're failing." "Could you lead due diligence here?" he asked. "And if we acquire the integration?" The room went quiet. I felt something steady in my chest. Not excitement, not fear. Readiness. "Yes," I said. The acquisition took 8 months. 8 months of late nights, spreadsheets, and forensic-level analysis. I saw everything during due diligence, the creative accounting, the revenue smoothing, the way leadership had masked decline with optics. Nothing illegal, just dishonest. I also saw my ex-husband's compensation package. Overpaid, underperforming, protected. The deal closed on a Tuesday. The announcement went company-wide that afternoon. New leadership, new structure, new oversight. And then the line that changed everything. Our SVP of operations will serve as acting president during integration. That was me. Walking back into that building for the first time felt surreal. Same lobby, same conference rooms, different power. I arrived early, reviewed organizational charts, performance reviews, compensation data. My ex-husband's file sat neatly labeled. Same title he'd gotten years ago. Never promoted since. Glowing reviews written by the CEO, her fingerprints unmistakable even through corporate tone. His actual metrics told a different story. Declining performance, missed targets, complaints from direct reports quietly filed and ignored. I closed the file without emotion. That afternoon, I held an all-hands meeting. 60 employees, nervous energy, whispers. And there he was, my ex-husband, standing near the middle of the room. When he saw me walk in, his face went pale. I introduced myself professionally, outlined the transition, spoke about accountability, transparency, restructuring, standard language. Then I said it. Some redundancies will be eliminated, some roles will be reevaluated. Hands went up. He raised his. Will there be severance for people who are let go? He asked. I looked directly at him for the first time. For eligible employees, I said calmly. He understood immediately. Performance-based terminations don't get severance. The night after the all-hands meeting, I didn't sleep. Not because I felt guilty, but because leadership, real leadership, comes with weight. Decisions stop being theoretical when faces attached to them. Names, families, mortgages. I sat alone in the temporary office they'd assigned me, city lights flickering through the glass, my laptop open to the final termination list. 18 names. Redundant roles, chronic underperformers. Positions created to reward loyalty instead of results. And one name I already knew would change everything. My ex-husband. I read his file again, slowly, carefully, as if there were some detail I'd missed that might justify sparing him. There wasn't. Years of declining performance, missed quotas, repeated complaints from direct reports who claimed he took credit for their work and disappeared when pressure hit. His compensation was $40,000 above market for output that barely met baseline. The only reason he'd lasted this long was proximity to power. The CEO who'd protected him was gone now, quietly removed as part of the acquisition. A golden parachute and a non-compete clause had escorted her out the door. She wasn't my concern anymore. He was. The meetings were scheduled for the following week. HR would lead them. I would be present. Leaders don't hide. The morning of his meeting, I arrived early, reviewed notes, took a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. When he walked in, he looked different. Not confident, not smug, defiant. He didn't sit when HR asked him to. He crossed his arms instead, jaw tight, eyes fixed on me, like this was a standoff he still believed he could win. I know what this is, he said, and you can't do this. The HR director remained calm. We're here to discuss your termination, effective immediately. His head snapped toward me. This is retaliation. I spoke for the first time. This is performance-based, I said evenly. Your metrics have declined for years. Your team has filed multiple complaints. You're compensated significantly above market rate for responsibilities you're not fulfilling. He laughed, sharp and bitter. This is because of the divorce. Our history doesn't change your numbers, I replied. Your performance issues are current. He turned to HR. My reviews were always positive. They were written by a former CEO with a personal relationship to you, the HR director said. We've reviewed your actual data. The termination stands. His face drained of color. No severance? He asked. Cause-based terminations aren't eligible, she answered. He looked at me then, not angry, not pleading. Afraid. I have a mortgage, he said. Bills. I held his gaze. You should have thought about that before coasting on protection instead of doing your job. He surged to his feet so fast his chair tipped backward. You think you're powerful now? He shouted. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Security was already at the door. I'd asked them to be nearby. Escort him out, I said. He has 15 minutes to collect personal items. He screamed the entire way down the hallway. Every insult he'd ever used. Every word designed to shrink me back into the woman he'd once dismissed across our kitchen table. No one intervened. People stared. Some looked away. Others watched in stunned silence. I returned to my office and closed the door. And felt nothing. No triumph, no relief. Just a quiet finality. He'd tried to erase me. Now I'd erased a line item on an org chart. That was the difference. The fallout didn't wait for permission. By the next morning, everyone knew. Office gossip moved faster than official memos, always has. The story mutated as it traveled. Favoritism, revenge, scandal. Some people painted me as cold, others as vindicated. Most didn't know what to think. I didn't correct anyone. I had a company to stabilize. 2 weeks after his termination, a letter arrived from my ex-husband's attorney. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, retaliation. The usual accusations, broad, dramatic, hollow. Our legal team reviewed it in under 10 minutes. There's no case here, our counsel said, calm and almost bored. We have documentation spanning years. Performance issues, complaints, compensation analysis. This dies in discovery. What do you recommend? I asked. Nothing, she replied. We respond formally and wait. And we did. The suit evaporated within a month. His attorney withdrew, likely when it became clear there was no retainer left once unemployment kicked in. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. He tried different angles, reaching out to former colleagues of mine, people I'd worked with years earlier. He hinted that I was unstable, vindictive, that the company was at risk under my leadership. Most ignored him. A few warned me. Your ex has been messaging people, one former coworker said gently. Thought you should know. Thank you, I replied. Please don't engage. Then he went public. Anonymous reviews appeared on job sites accusing leadership of discrimination and abuse of power. Posts surfaced on industry forums about toxic management. Our PR team stepped in immediately. Reviews posted outside the allowed time frame were flagged and removed. The forums were trickier, but our general counsel sent cease and desist letters citing defamation. The posts stopped. Silence returned. And in that silence, the work finally spoke for itself. We cut redundant layers of management, renegotiated vendor contracts that had been bleeding money for years, rebuilt teams around accountability instead of proximity to leadership. The numbers responded fast. First quarter, under new management, we beat projections by 12%. Second quarter, 15%. By the third, we'd recovered nearly everything the previous leadership had lost. The board was thrilled. So was the CEO. 3 months after the integration began, he called me into his office. You've stabilized this faster than we expected, he said. I want to make it official. He slid a document across the desk. President. Full operational control. The title didn't make my hands shake. It just fit. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I ran into my ex-husband at a coffee shop. Pure coincidence. I was grabbing coffee before a meeting. He was sitting near the window with a laptop open, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. When he looked up and saw me, his expression shifted through shock, embarrassment, and something like resignation. I considered leaving. He stood first. Can we talk? He asked. Please. I don't think that's a good idea. 5 minutes, he said. That's all. Against my better judgment, I sat. He looked older than I remembered, not aged, worn. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For everything. The affair. What I said about you never being CEO. All of it. I waited. I was wrong about you, he continued. About everything. Okay, I said. That was it. He blinked. That's all? What are you looking for? I asked. Forgiveness? Validation. He looked down at his coffee. I heard you're president now. Yes. You're doing well. I am. He hesitated. I'm not. I lost the house. Couldn't keep up payments without my salary. I'm staying with my sister. That's rough, I said honestly. Can you help me? He asked. A reference. Anything. I shook my head. No. His voice cracked. Please, I'm desperate. You were desperate once, to get ahead, I replied. You used people, used me, lied in court, coasted on protection instead of competence. I made mistakes. You made choices, I said, and choices have consequences. I stood. I'm not going to help you, I continued, but I'm also not going to keep hurting you. You're doing that fine on your own. He stared at the table. You've changed, he said softly. You're cold now. No, I replied. I just stopped letting people walk all over me. There's a difference. I left without looking back, and as I walked out, I felt it, the moment the past finally released its grip. The months after that coffee shop encounter were strangely quiet. No more legal threats, no anonymous posts, no messages filtering back through acquaintances. My ex-husband disappeared from my daily awareness, the way background noise fades once you stop listening for it. And in that quiet, consequences finished unfolding. The company continued to stabilize, then accelerate. Without the old leadership's protectionism, Truth surfaced quickly. Performance metrics were no longer suggestions. They mattered. Teams that had been silenced found their voices. People who had carried entire departments without recognition were promoted. Others, exposed by the absence of cover, drifted out. 6 months after the acquisition, I was called into a meeting with the CEO and private equity partners. They didn't waste time. "We want you to run this," the CEO said. "Not as interim, permanently." The title was formalized shortly after. President. Then, later, CEO. The exact role my husband once laughed about across our kitchen table. I didn't celebrate publicly. No posts, no speeches, just a quiet dinner with myself, a glass of water, and the realization that I'd rebuilt everything that had been taken. Without shortcuts, without leverage, without betrayal. News traveled, though, it always does. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about my ex-husband's life as it unraveled. After unemployment ran out, his attorney dropped him completely. The wrongful termination suit collapsed. He couldn't afford to keep pushing. He eventually found work, but not where he wanted. Sales coordinator, entry level, a small firm with limited growth, a salary barely half of what he'd once made. He was in his early 40s, starting over from the bottom. The woman he'd cheated with, my former boss, had not landed softly either. Her wrongful termination lawsuit against our parent company went nowhere. During discovery, our legal team produced evidence of her creative accounting practices. Not illegal enough for charges, but enough to destroy credibility. The case was dismissed. Last I heard, she was doing contract consulting. Short term, no authority, no team. People asked if I felt bad, if I regretted how things turned out, if I thought I'd gone too far. The answer surprised them. No, I said, I didn't go far at all. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't scheme to take over a company just to fire my ex-husband. I didn't manipulate systems to humiliate anyone. I worked. I improved. I accepted opportunities when they came. The fact that one of those opportunities led me back to the company where everything fell apart was coincidence. What I did there was business. He wasn't terminated because he was my ex. He was terminated because he was bad at his job. The previous leadership protected him because they were sleeping together. Once that protection disappeared and performance mattered, he couldn't survive. That isn't vengeance. That's accountability. One afternoon, someone forwarded me a screenshot. My ex-husband had posted something vague and bitter about powerful women abusing authority, about how karma eventually comes for everyone. I closed the message without responding. Karma had already done its work. Not loudly, not dramatically, precisely. Meanwhile, my own life expanded quietly. I bought a house. Not flashy, just right. A place that felt like mine from the moment I walked in. 3 bedrooms, good light, a neighborhood where no one knew my history. I started seeing someone after the promotion. He worked in consulting too, but at a different firm, in a completely separate orbit. Intelligent, grounded, not impressed by titles. We took things slow. No rushing, no merging lives prematurely, just respect. That alone felt revolutionary. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the woman I was then, sitting in that kitchen, swallowing an insult because she thought love required endurance. I wish I could tell her something. Not that it would get better, but that she would get stronger. And that strength, once earned, changes the rules permanently. The company is thriving now. Revenue up, teams stable, systems clean. The kind of success that doesn't need constant announcements because it shows up in results. The board finalized my appointment as CEO. Official, permanent, unquestioned. The title doesn't feel like a trophy. It feels like alignment. I'm in a relationship now too. Healthy, unrushed, built on mutual respect instead of ambition by proxy. He doesn't need me to advance his career. I don't need him to validate mine. We talk. We disagree. We listen. People sometimes ask if I ever think about my ex-husband. The honest answer is no, at least not the way they expect. I don't replay conversations. I don't fantasize about alternate endings. I don't wonder what I could have done differently. Because clarity is a kind of closure. He once looked at me and told me I'd never be CEO. Told me to be grateful he stayed. He believed power was something you borrowed. From proximity, from protection, from sleeping with the right person at the right time. He was wrong. Power isn't borrowed. It's built. Brick by brick, decision by decision, quiet nights choosing discipline over drama, walking away instead of proving a point, letting systems work instead of forcing outcomes. I didn't win because I was ruthless. I won because I was consistent. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I stopped protecting people who didn't deserve it. There's a difference. Some people call that cold. I call it sane. If you're listening to this story and you're in the middle of being underestimated by a partner, a boss, a system that benefits from your silence, hear this clearly. You don't need revenge. You don't need to announce your exit. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You need time, focus, and the courage to let go of people who confuse access to you with entitlement. The best revenge isn't humiliation. It's alignment. It's building a life so solid that the people who tried to erase you can't even reach it. And one day, without raising your voice, without looking back, you'll realize something quietly extraordinary. They're still explaining themselves, and you're done explaining anything at all.